Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a quiet war veteran finds an eviction notice nailed to his gate by a corrupt HOA he never joined, he sparks a showdown that uncovers a multi-million-dollar fraud. One man, one house, one hell of a fight. This isn't just a story, it's a reckoning. I woke up that morning like I had every other Tuesday for the past 20 years, with the steady creak of my knees and the smell of brewed coffee drifting from the kitchen. Rasty, my old bloodhound, nudged at my boot with his nose, tail thumping softly against the floorboards. Sunlight crept through the blinds, painting long stripes across the living room rug. Another quiet day in Saddle Creek, Utah. Or so I thought. I stepped outside, coffee mug in one hand, leash in the other, and walked down the gravel path toward the front gate. Rasty trotted ahead, ears perked, tail wagging. We'd done this little ritual 1,000 times. I opened the gate to grab the morning paper, and that's when I saw it, nailed right into the wooden slat with a rusty roofing tack. A sheet of paper, thick, official-looking, sealed, stamped, typed in large block letters across the top, Notice of Forfeiture and Removal, Cedar Crest Homeowners Association. I stood there for a full minute, reading the damn thing again and again, thinking I was still half asleep. Mr. Hillman, your property is now considered part of Cedar Crest HOA jurisdiction due to administrative reassignment. As a result of unpaid association dues totaling $11,220, your home is now under HOA forfeiture procedures. You are hereby instructed to vacate the premises within 3 hours of this notice, or legal action will be pursued. Failure to comply will result in immediate enforcement. Sincerely, Karen Ferris, President, Cedar Crest Homeowners Association. I read it again, just to be sure I hadn't suffered a stroke sometime between bed and the mailbox. My name was on it. My address. The letterhead looked real, but everything about it screamed bullshit. I hadn't signed a damn thing with the HOA. My house, my land sat outside their bubble. Always had. I bought it with cash in 1985. Built it with my own hands and a borrowed backhoe. Lived on it since Reagan was in office and never owed a dime to anyone but the IRS. I stood there, still in my robe and boots, wind kicking up the edges of the notice, when Rasty let out a low whine. I looked down at him, then back at the paper. All right, I muttered. Let's see what the hell this is. I headed back inside, dumped my coffee, and picked up the landline. The HOA office number was printed at the bottom of the page. I called it. After 4 rings, a voice answered, cold, clipped, and unmistakably smug. Cedar Crest HOA, this is Karen speaking. Of course it was. Karen Ferris. Yes, and who is this? This is Frank Hillman. I just found your little eviction notice on my gate. Want to explain what the hell you think you're doing? There was a pause. Not long. Just long enough for her to size me up through the receiver. Then she spoke. Mr. Hillman. Yes. We've expanded the Cedar Crest boundaries. Your parcel was included in last quarter's zoning extension. You were notified 3 times by mail. You failed to pay the required dues. And under HOA policy, your property is now subject to forfeiture. My grip tightened on the receiver. You must have lost your damn mind. I never signed into Cedar Crest. My land isn't part of your development. You were annexed administratively. It's legally binding. The hell it is. Mr. Hillman, she continued, voice thick with false politeness, you've had ample opportunity to comply. Now you have 3 hours to vacate. Please do so peaceably. I stared at the wall for a beat, letting that sink in. Then I leaned back and said, flat as a rifle shot, I'm not going anywhere, and we'll see who takes who off this land today. She hesitated. Are you threatening HOA officials? I'm promising you this. If you step 1 foot on my property with that nonsense, I'll make sure the law gets a front row seat. Now hang up and don't call again. I slammed the phone back into the cradle. For a minute, I just stood there, breathing slow. The ticking clock above the stove sounded like a metronome counting down to something awful. I looked around at my kitchen, the knotty pine cabinets, the photo of my late wife on the fridge, the old clock with the trout on it, and then out the window, where the edge of my land met the neat little rows of vinyl-sided clones across the street. Something wasn't right. This wasn't incompetence. This wasn't some clerical hiccup. This was a setup, a hostile grab. I went back outside, ripped the notice off the gate, and stuffed it in my jacket. Rasty sat by the porch, head cocked, watching me. Looks like we're going to have company, boy, I said. He wagged his tail once, then laid down like it was just another Tuesday. But it wasn't. And I had 3 hours to prove it. I wasn't the kind of man who panicked easily. Hell, I'd been through 3 oil busts, 1 divorce, a wildfire, and a colonoscopy without flinching. But something about that morning settled wrong in my bones, like a storm you can feel in your teeth. Karen Ferris hadn't just made a clerical error, she'd made a move. A calculated, organized, and deliberately illegal move. And she thought I'd just shuffle out of my own damn house with a cardboard box and a leash in hand. She had no idea who she was dealing with. The first thing I did was go to my office. Real office, not some laptop on the couch setup. It still had a metal file cabinet, a surplus desk from City Hall, and a landline with a cord that reached all the way to the back window. I threw open the cabinet and pulled out the fat red binder marked Property Original. It hadn't been touched in years, but it still smelled like old ink and glue. Inside was everything I needed. A certified deed dated August of 1985, issued by Uintah County. A topographic survey with my name, parcel ID, and boundaries marked in black ink, and the original tax record showing my land purchased. Outright, no liens, no covenants, no HOA. I copied everything, then scanned it and saved it 3 ways: USB, cloud, and 1 printed set to take with me. Next, I picked up the phone and dialed the direct number to Brooks Bronson, Uintah County's elected sheriff and an old friend from back in my days on the local infrastructure board. We hadn't talked in a while, not since the flooding 3 springs ago, but when he answered, he didn't miss a beat. "Frank," he said, "you got that someone's about to regret their life choices tone again." "Brooks," I replied, "you got a minute?" I explained everything: the notice, the voice on the phone, the threat of forfeiture. I didn't sugarcoat a damn thing. By the time I was finished, there was a long silence on the line. Then Brooks said, "You're telling me they nailed an eviction notice to your gate and told you to leave your own house in 3 hours. And they claim you're part of Cedar Crest now?" "That's the claim. They've got balls," he muttered. "All right, I'll talk to the county assessor's office and zoning. If what you're saying checks out, we're looking at fraud. Maybe criminal impersonation if she signed anything under false authority. I've got documentation for everything. I'm also sending a copy of the notice and my deed to your office and the DA. Do it now. And Frank, stay on your property. Don't open the gate to anyone. And if they show up before we're ready, call dispatch. I'll get someone there. Already planning on it." While the scanner hummed, I went into the back shed and flipped the switch on my old surveillance system. I'd installed the cameras a few years ago after some meth heads tried stealing copper wire from the barn. Never had to use them much, but they still worked. 8 cameras, full coverage, infrared, all wired to an external DVR and now streaming to my phone. By 10 o'clock, I had sent 4 emails, 1 to Brooks, 1 to the DA's office, 1 to the county recorder, and 1 to the Saddle Creek Times, marked confidential, just in case this thing got uglier. I also included a copy of the county zoning map I pulled from the public access site. My property sat just west of the HOA's boundary line, like an island surrounded by over-fertilized conformity. You could clearly see my lot was not included in their jurisdiction. It wasn't just my word. It was on the damn map. In color. I took a moment to breathe. Rasty had fallen asleep under the desk. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of cut grass and early autumn. But I couldn't relax. I remembered something. About 6 months back, Karen Ferris had approached me during a community social hour in front of the new clubhouse they built across the road. I'd walked over for free lemonade and wound up in a 20-minute monologue about property uniformity and shared values. She'd asked if I was open to integration, and I'd told her politely to take her integration and shove it where the HOA didn't shine. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Just another busybody with too much free time and a brochure fetish. Now I realized that was her probing me, testing the fence, seeing if I'd fold. She must have decided I was weak, alone, old, soft. A man she could pressure into silence. Well, she got the old part right. I grabbed my cell and checked the camera feeds. All quiet. For now. But I knew that wouldn't last. I went outside and looked down my drive. The gravel was still damp from last night's rain. The American flag fluttered in the wind above my porch. Everything looked peaceful, ordinary, but there was tension in the air, like static before a lightning strike. I picked up a wrench from my tool rack and tightened the bolts on the main gate. Just a habit. Just something to keep my hands busy while the enemy lined up her next move. She gave me 3 hours. I wasn't going anywhere, but I sure as hell wasn't waiting empty-handed. I didn't have to wait long. 2 hours and 31 minutes after the so-called notice had been posted, the gravel at the end of my driveway began to crunch beneath unfamiliar tires. I was sitting on the porch with Raisty curled up at my feet, a fresh cup of coffee in one hand and my cell phone in the other, camera feeds live and rolling to the cloud. I stood slowly, placed the cup down on the railing, and watched as the caravan pulled in. First came a white pickup truck with a Cedar Crest HOA logo slapped on the side like a damn sheriff's star. Big chrome grille, shiny tires, like it had never seen a dirt road in its life. Behind it, a newer model SUV followed. Tinted windows, no plates, no state tag. That already set my teeth on edge. The truck came to a stop just outside my gate. 3 men got out, all in matching polos with HOA enforcement printed across the chest in bold Navy letters, like they were federal agents or mall cops on a power trip. One carried a clipboard, another held a bolt cutter the size of a baseball bat, and the third, younger, nervous-looking, was filming the whole thing with a GoPro strapped to his chest. Then she stepped out. Karen Ferris, dressed head to toe in white, blazer, slacks, heels, like she was walking into a boardroom instead of someone's front yard. She carried a leather binder in one hand and a goddamn bullhorn in the other. She looked at me like I was some old wreck of a building scheduled for demolition. "Mr. Hillman," she called out through the megaphone, her voice amplified and brittle. "You have been served formal notice. You have failed to vacate the premises within the time allotted. HOA enforcement is authorized to secure and reclaim this property under Section—" I held up my hand, calm, steady, like I was signaling a dog to stay. "Karen," I said, loud enough to carry, "you're trespassing." "This is no longer your property, Mr. Hillman," she replied, her voice sharp and theatrical. "You failed to comply with association obligations and ignored repeated communications. You've left us no choice." The man with the bolt cutter moved toward the gate. My gate, the one I'd welded myself out of old oil rig piping back in 92nd. He lined up the cutter with the chain, like this was just another Tuesday eviction. I stepped off the porch slowly, pulling my phone out, camera recording. "Karen," I said again, this time firmer, "I've already sent every document you faked to the county sheriff. I've got video evidence, a clean deed, a zoning map, and a notarized affidavit showing my land's been private since before your HOA even existed. If you cut that chain, you're committing a felony." She actually smiled at that. Real smug. "Mr. Hillman," she said almost gently, "you've had your say. Now let's end this with dignity." And that's when I heard it. Gravel again, but not from her crew. 2 black and white county SUVs pulled in behind her caravan. No lights, no sirens. Just the weight of the law rolling up quiet and heavy. The HOA guys turned, visibly unsure of what to do. Karen froze. And I mean froze, like a deer in headlights, her hand still clutching the binder of forged papers. From the first SUV stepped Sheriff Brooks Bronson himself, sunglasses on, hat in place, every inch of him radiating, "Do not test me today." 2 deputies flanked him. One already had a clipboard in hand. Brooks walked right past the HOA truck and stopped at the gate, facing Karen like she was a kid who'd just been caught sneaking booze into prom. "Karen Ferris," he said flatly, "you're under investigation for criminal fraud, property falsification, and unlawful attempted seizure of real estate. Step away from the gate and put the binder down." She blinked. "Excuse me? I am the president of—" "You're not the president of anything right now. Hands where I can see them." It was beautiful, slow, precise. She didn't even get to scream or flail. One of the deputies already had the cuffs out. Her 3 little henchmen backed off fast. The guy with the bolt cutter dropped it like it was radioactive. Karen went pale as concrete. She muttered something about legal oversight, but Brooks was already reading her rights. I just stood there, leaning on my cane like I was watching a high school play wrap up its final act. Raisty, bless him, barked twice and trotted over to the gate, tail wagging like we'd just won the lottery. One of the deputies gathered up the fake documents, the eviction notice, the forged HOA declarations, even a fake title transfer form. Another began taking statements from the HOA crew who suddenly had no idea who gave them orders. Brooks looked over at me, gave the smallest nod, then said to one of his guys, "Bag everything. I want full forensics on those print dates, and get a copy of that body cam footage. If she forged anything else, I want it on record." Karen didn't look at me as they walked her to the SUV. She kept her eyes on the ground, mouth tight, heels clicking on the gravel like punctuation marks at the end of a failed sentence. I let out a long breath, not because it was over. I knew it wasn't, but because in that moment, on my own land, in front of my own house, I'd just watched a queen try to claim my kingdom and get dragged away in shackles for the effort. And I wasn't done yet. You'd think getting someone arrested in your front yard would end things, that the sound of steel cuffs clicking shut would be the final period on this mess. But I've lived long enough to know that snakes don't die easy. They shed their skin and try again, just slicker and harder to spot. It was 2 days after the arrest. The house was quiet. Too quiet, if I'm honest. I'd had a few neighbors swing by to check in. The Langleys brought a casserole. Old Tom from up the road stopped by with a six-pack and a shaky, "Hell yeah, Frank." But mostly, it was just me and Rasty, watching camera feeds and waiting for the dust to settle. Only it didn't. That Thursday morning, I got a knock on the door, UPS envelope, no sender listed. Inside was a thick printout. Public statement from the Cedar Crest Homeowners Association regarding the incident at Parcel 1048. I sat down and read every word, jaw clenched tighter with each paragraph. Cedar Crest HOA expresses its regret regarding recent confusion concerning the property located at the boundary of our jurisdiction. Contrary to circulating rumors, HOA President Karen Ferris was engaged in a good faith effort to assist Mr. Hillman in resolving an administrative oversight related to unpaid taxes and neighborhood compliance. HOA records show numerous attempts to contact Mr. Hillman, all of which were either declined or ignored. The association's intention was to prevent the unnecessary seizure of his property by county authorities due to long-standing neglect. The events of Tuesday morning were the unfortunate result of miscommunication and overreaction. We are committed to transparency and community unity going forward. I laughed, out loud, the kind of laugh you don't enjoy but choke on. Good faith effort, prevent seizure, overreaction. They were rewriting the entire damn story. An hour later, I saw the first online posts. HOA's Facebook page had a polished community update with smiling stock photos of diverse families and lawn chairs. Karen's name was barely mentioned, just a vague reference to ongoing legal review and volunteer leadership transition. The post claimed I had been in discussions about joining the HOA for over a year, and they had offered flexible compliance. Terms. Bull. Absolute pressurized grade A bullshit. And it didn't stop there. Local Saddle Creek forums had anonymous users, brand new accounts, posting things like, "You know, Frank used to be a nice guy, but he's gotten paranoid lately. Maybe he just misunderstood the situation. HOA was trying to help. Nobody talks about the back taxes. I heard Karen was trying to donate funds to save his house. He just snapped." It was slick, coordinated, professional even. This wasn't Karen on her phone from jail. Someone else in Cedar Crest had picked up the torch. The HOA board must have circled the wagons fast, trying to spin the story before it caught fire. And it was working. A neighbor I barely knew, some guy named Micah who moved in 2 years ago, crossed the street and asked me if I was doing okay mentally. Mentally, I said, blinking at him. "Yeah, I mean, I read online. Someone said you were a little, unstable. You know, with everything going on." I stared at him so hard he actually stepped back. "Micah," I said quietly, "if you ever read a thing about me online again, maybe ask yourself who posted it. Then turn off your damn router." He left in a hurry. I wasn't going to let these snakes build a nest in public opinion. If they wanted a PR war, I'd give them one, but not the way they'd expect. I called Brooks first, just to update him. He grunted, said, "They're pulling an old trick. Smear the victim before the grand jury sees anything. You keep your head, Frank. We're working the paper trail." But I had something else in mind, too. The next day, I contacted a friend of my late wife, Olivia Hallbrook, editor at the local Saddle Creek Sentinel. She owed me a favor, and I wasn't above calling in chips. I handed her a neat folder, copies of the notice, my deed, the zoning map, the video of Karen's arrest, and a short summary of events written in plain English. By the weekend, her piece ran on the front page. Veteran homeowner targeted by HOA power grab. Illegal eviction attempt ends in arrest. It had my face, my house, my dog, and most importantly, the truth. That's when the emails started. 5 other homeowners, elderly, Quiet. People who hadn't spoken up before. They sent me copies of their notices, their invitations to join the HOA, their letters with missing page numbers and strange font mismatches. One of them, a widow named Elsie who lived up the hill, had signed something in 2015, thinking it was just a neighborhood welcome packet. Now her house was listed on a HOA foreclosure auction site, owned by a company with a PO box in Nevada. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a system, a racket. Karen hadn't worked alone, and her friends weren't done yet. But neither was I. The thing about fighting snakes is you can't just cut off the head. Not if it's got a dozen more slithering underneath, waiting for the lights to go out so they can finish the job. And I'd started to realize something ugly. Karen wasn't the brain. She was just the face. The PR smile. The white blazer front for something colder, deeper, and older than I first figured. If I wanted to kill this thing for good, I had to go below the skin. The call came from Wyatt Lanning, a buddy of mine from way back, once ran the local community theater before it went bankrupt during COVID. I remembered him as the only guy who could make a Shakespeare monologue sound like a bar fight. When I reached out, I didn't even finish explaining what I needed before he said, "You want a sting?" "Yeah," I replied. "You ever play a state auditor?" He laughed. "I once played Nixon in a bowling alley. I can be whoever you need." I gave him the backstory, told him to grow a beard, throw on a beige suit, and carry a cheap government-issued briefcase. I even printed a badge for him. Nothing official, just something that looked the part enough to make HOA idiots blink twice. We dubbed him Kenneth Talbot, Special Liaison for Regulatory Oversight. He showed up at Cedar Crest's temporary HOA office on a Monday morning, same one where Karen used to hold her little rulebook seances. A couple of her board members were already there, holding a closed-door meeting. Kenneth, walked in with full confidence and a clipboard, told them he was there for an emergency oversight review under Utah Code 1432 subsection G, which, by the way, does not exist. They bought it anyway. I sat in my truck 2 blocks away, listening through a wire he had pinned to the collar of his jacket. The man deserved an Oscar. "Well, we weren't expecting," one of the board members stammered. "Correct," Wyatt snapped, flipping through blank pages. That's how fraud inspections work. He got access to their printer logs, took photos of locked cabinets, asked questions about recent acquisitions, and then he asked if anyone else had signed transfer authorizations for my property. And that's when the magic happened. One of them, a bald guy named Daryl with the kind of voice you expect from a middle school vice principal, actually said, "Karen handled that one." She said the guy had already agreed. She just needed a signature on file. She found an old form from, 2014 and reused it. Wyatt paused just long enough. She reused a prior form. Yeah, said it was a clerical streamlining. Honestly, she ran a tight ship. A tight ship of racketeers. But it got better. Before leaving, Wyatt leaned in and asked, "In those internal auctions, who handles the bidding process?" "Karen," Daryl said again, clearly proud. "She arranged everything. Handled title transfers, buyer packets, wire confirmations. She even used her personal email, said it was faster than the HOA domain. We had her, not just on trespassing, not just on forgery, but on a deliberate system of real estate fraud, with emails, forged signatures, fake auctions, and private enrichment. Wyatt got out clean, drove straight to my place, handed over the flash drive, and poured himself 2 fingers of my best whiskey. He earned it. "This woman's not just greedy," he said, shaking his head. "She's organized. This is white-collar crime wearing garden club pearls." I sent the audio to Sheriff Bronson. His reply was one word: outstanding. But I wasn't done. The next morning, my attorney, Miriam Gould, a sharp-as-nails widow who had once been married to a state judge and now practiced law like it was a blood sport, filed a petition for civil injunction. We attached the transcripts, the zoning maps, and Wyatt's recording as supporting evidence of systemic HOA fraud. Miriam also sent a formal letter to the county auditor's office requesting a forensic review of Cedar Crest HOA's books under suspicion of embezzlement, collusion, and unlawful foreclosure of private assets. And just for good measure, I had 2 yard signs printed, big ones, red letters on white background. "This land is not for sale. This house is not yours." Choi, you chose the wrong man. I put one at the end of my driveway and the other right on my porch. It wasn't about scaring them off anymore. It was about telling them, and everyone else in this town, that I was no longer on defense. The war had started, and now I was hunting. The thing about crooks like Karen is they always underestimate the paper trail. They think if they hide things behind enough procedures and alphabet soup bureaucracy, no one will bother to untangle the mess. And 9 times out of 10, they're right. Most people give up, but I don't. After Wyatt's sting, Miriam brought in the big guns. She'd been quietly working behind the scenes with a retired IRS auditor named Harold Belmore, a man who could smell shell corporations like a bloodhound smells bacon. Harold looked like every boring accountant stereotype rolled into one. Wire-rimmed glasses, khakis, loafers, a voice like slow gravel. But when he talked numbers, the man turned into a surgeon. Clean, cold, lethal. He requested access to Cedar Crest HOA's public financial statements, the ones they were legally obligated to submit each quarter. Then he cross-referenced those with vendor listings, permit requests, and property transfer filings from the county recorder's office. It took him 3 days. 3. Then he called us in. We met in Miriam's office. Small, quiet, walls lined with law books so old the dust was a legal liability. Harold had set up his laptop on the conference table with 2 giant monitors hooked in. One showed spreadsheets, the other maps and flowcharts. "I'll make this simple," he said, adjusting his glasses. "What you've got isn't just harassment or misconduct. It's theft, systematic, organized, and ongoing." He clicked through slides. Over the last 4 years, Cedar Crest HOA reported landscaping and security expenditures that exceeded $2.1 million. But I traced those payments, and here's the kicker, to 4 shell companies. All of them were registered to a P.O. box in Henderson, Nevada. And the authorized signer on all 4 accounts? Click, a scanned signature, Karen Ferris. She created fake vendors, Harold continued, then funneled HOA dues into them, billed them as services, pocketed the cash. I estimate conservatively that she skimmed between $3.5 and $3.8 million total. Miriam didn't flinch. "What about property seizures?" "Worse," Harold replied. Using compliance violations as a pretext, she targeted elderly or absentee homeowners, sent them letters they didn't understand, then initiated foreclosure under the HOA's bylaws. But those auctions... He pulled up a web page, password-protected private domain. She ran them off the books, sold the homes to proxies, flipped them, profited again. We're talking criminal fraud, wire fraud, RICO-level conspiracy. I stared at the screen. One of the homes listed was Elsie's, the widow who'd sent me that confused letter. Another belonged to a man I knew, a Korean War vet who'd moved to assisted living last year. His daughter never got a chance to reclaim the house. It had already sold at auction to one of Karen's fake LLCs. "Can you prove all of this?" I asked, low. Harold didn't even blink. "Already have. I've got timestamps, IP logs, vendor routing info, and internal emails. I even matched up signatures. Some of the deeds were notarized by a woman who died in 2019. Miriam stood, hands behind her back, like a general surveying a battlefield. "We take this to the district attorney," she said. "Full brief. Multiple victims. This isn't civil anymore. It's criminal and federal." That same afternoon, Brooks called me. He'd already been briefed. "Frank," he said, "you've opened the gates of hell for them." "Good," I replied. "Let it burn." He told me a multi-agency task force was now involved, state fraud investigators, the Attorney General's office, even a few folks from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Turns out HOA fraud wasn't just local anymore. This thing had spread into other neighborhoods, other counties. Cedar Crest was just the model. Karen's little empire was about to collapse like a prefab patio set in a hailstorm, but there was one last cherry on top. Miriam walked into the next HOA board meeting, uninvited, and handed each surviving member a printed copy of Harold's report. Their faces went pale one by one as they turned the pages. Then she smiled and said, "You should all lawyer up." And with that, we walked out. Heads high, storm behind us, but I knew it wasn't over yet, because people like Karen don't go down quietly. They screech on the way out. They came for her on a Thursday, not with sirens and shouting, not like in the movies. It was quiet, surgical. 2 unmarked black vehicles rolled up to her McMansion on Bluebell Lane just past dawn. The front yard still had Halloween decorations, cheap plastic skeletons scattered on the lawn like an accidental metaphor. I didn't see it in person, but I watched the footage later. Karen stepping out in a silk robe, clutching a coffee mug like it could ward off what was coming. She tried to talk. They didn't let her. One of the officers read off a list of charges so long it barely fit in one breath. Conspiracy, mail fraud, wire fraud, forgery, elder exploitation, racketeering. Her knees buckled halfway through. By noon, the story was everywhere. The Salt Lake Tribune ran a front-page headline, HOA president indicted in multi-million fraud, elderly residents targeted in statewide scheme. Karen's mugshot, eyes puffy, mouth clenched, makeup half gone, sat next to a photo of my front porch. And a caption that read, Frank Hillman refused to leave his home and uncovered the truth. I didn't want the attention, but I wasn't going to run from it either. That weekend, a news crew came out from Salt Lake. Young woman with a sharp blazer and a smile too wide for the weight of the story. They interviewed me next to my old red barn, Rasty snoozing in the background like a seasoned bodyguard. I kept it short. If folks think age makes you weak, I told the camera, they haven't met the kind of old men who build their houses nail by nail and pay for them in cash. I'm not just a veteran, I'm a homeowner. And that still means something where I come from. The footage went viral. God help me. My nephew sent me a screenshot. Apparently, I was trending on TikTok under Ho Slayer, whatever that meant. But the attention wasn't the satisfying part. The satisfying part was what came after. Under pressure from the state, Cedar Crest HOA was placed under emergency receivership. The remaining board members resigned. Some cut deals. One of them, Daryl, the bald stooge from the Sting, flipped completely and handed over every file, login, and meeting recording he had. Turns out Karen had been running versions of this scheme for years, not just in Cedar Crest, but in 2 other HOAs she'd consulted for out in West Valley. The deeper investigators dug, the worse it got. In one case, she had foreclosed on a widower while he was in hospice, then used a forged power of attorney to sell the home. The man died before he even knew he'd been robbed. In another, she targeted a Korean War vet's family trust, used an internal policy amendment to override their claim to the home after the owner was moved to assisted living. Every step of it was coded in fake signatures, clerical errors, and legalese meant to drown people who didn't know how to fight back, until someone did. At the trial, I was called as a witness. I wore my only suit, charcoal gray, still smelled like cedar from where it had hung in the closet untouched for over a decade. I stood tall in the witness box, answered every question clear and steady. When the prosecutor asked me how it started, I held up the original notice. She tried to take my house with a piece of paper and a bolt cutter, I said, but she picked the wrong damn gate. Karen sat across the courtroom, thinner than I remembered, her once flawless hair pulled back into a bun that screamed defeat. She didn't look at me. The jury took less than 4 hours. 17 years. That was the sentence. Fraud, racketeering, multiple counts of elder exploitation, no parole for at least 11. A court order banned her from any administrative role in any HOA or nonprofit organization for life. I was there when they let her out. Still didn't look at me. Didn't matter. What mattered was that justice for once wasn't just a word on a brochure. Life slowed down again. Eventually, the mail came like it used to. Just coupons and water bills. The gate stayed locked, but not out of fear anymore. Just habit. The grass kept growing, and I kept cutting it. Rasty chased squirrels like he hadn't just watched me dismantle a criminal empire in orthopedic boots. But things had changed. The Cedar Crest HOA, or what was left of it, dissolved fully within 3 months. The county stepped in, ran an independent audit, and confirmed what we already knew. Over a dozen homes had been seized or coerced under false pretenses. Some were returned to rightful owners. Others ended up in ugly probate tangles. But at least the bleeding stopped. The state legislature passed something called the Hillman Act. Yeah, my name. It was weird. The bill created new oversight rules for HOAs, mandatory transparency, third-party audits, criminal background checks for board members, and clear opt-out clauses for standalone properties. They even used language from Harold's report in the legislative notes. I still keep a copy framed above my workbench in the shed, not because I'm proud, because people forget, and paper doesn't. One of the biggest surprises came from the neighbors, especially the newer ones. People who hadn't said more than 2 words to me before all this happened now stopped by just to talk. Young couple across the street brought their toddler over with a banana bread loaf. Said I reminded them of the girl's grandpa. The kid tried to ride Rasty like a pony. Rasty didn't mind. Every Sunday, a group of us meets in my backyard. No speeches, no motions, no quorum required, just lawn chairs, iced tea, and people who've learned that neighbor doesn't mean shared fence. It means shared defense. One of them, a retired school principal named Joan, now leads a watchdog committee for HOA abuse cases across the state. She calls herself the Neighborhood Resistance. I call her a damn bulldog. She grins every time. I still get letters, emails from other states, people who saw the story, who lived something similar, who didn't know they were allowed to fight back. Some ask me for advice. Some just want to say thanks. I answer every single one. Takes time. But time's the one thing I've still got plenty of. I even started fixing up the old barn, not for tools or storage, but something else. Maybe a community workshop, a place to teach kids how to use a wrench, not just a tablet, something to pass on. And on the fence facing the street, right under the American flag that flaps like hell every time the wind rolls in from the canyon, I bolted on a new sign, thick wood, burned letters, clear as truth. Here lives Frank Hillman. He stood his ground. He's not moving. HOA tried. Didn't work. You're next. I don't think anyone will try again. But if they do, I'll be here. Same gate, same porch, same dog. Ready.